In 1986, De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, the production company behind My Little Pony the movie, released a sequel to King Kong under the name King Kong Lives. In Japan and a few other regions, the title was changed to King Kong 2.
King Kong 2.
While the movie sits at a comfortable 3.9 rating on IMDb and has a perfect 0 out of 10 on Rotten Tomatoes, the tie-in video game developed and published by Konami is not bad. It's King Kong 2 for the Famicom. It's King Kong 2 for the Famicom.
Yeah. 87年正月、世界中が再びパニックになる。
King Kong 2 Ikari no Megaton Punch roughly translates to King Kong 2 Megaton Punch of Anger.
Konami.
As stated in the intro, it's a movie game, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the movie other than the presence of artificial hearts, King Kong, and Lady Kong. What's immediately cool about this game is that you play as King Kong. You're an 8-bit representation of a giant gorilla, and when you jump in the air and land, the entire screen shakes. It's just very satisfying to control King Kong, and that's one of the best things about this game, satisfying movement. It also gives you more control in the air than I think I've ever had in any top-down 2D game. One of the most fun things to do in the game is to jump around and roll the D-pad in a circular motion and have King Kong do kind of corkscrews in the air. And there's not a lot of content or information about this game out there, so I want to try and communicate as clearly as I possibly can what you actually do in this game. The general plot is that your waifu, Lady Kong, has been kidnapped. Sorry, Kong-napped. And as King Kong, you have to travel between 9 different worlds in search of 8 keys needed to open the door to the final boss guarding Lady Kong. Each key itself is also guarded by a boss that Kong will have to defeat. The worlds are connected via secret doors, and if you know where to find the entrances and exits, you can freely move between the worlds without needing to defeat any bosses. Throughout the different worlds, you can find a variety of items to power yourself up, a large variety of enemies and obstacles, and a kind of frustrating amount of secret doors leading to different worlds with seemingly no rhyme or reason. You have to find where the bosses are in each world, and unlike games like Castlevania, also by Konami, it's just not obvious where bosses are supposed to be. You actually have to go out hunting for them. Upon defeating the final boss and rescuing your beloved, you're treated to an ending screen that's pretty cute and features a little baby Kong. And if you hold the A and B buttons down throughout the entirety of the credits, on the very last screen, it'll show a hidden message to you. Mine essentially translated to pretty good, not bad. And apparently I think the longest one in the game is "You sure are persistent." And unlike the other games that I've covered so far for Retro Odyssey, there is no data for this game on how long to beat. So this was uncharted territory. But after playing through it a few times, I can break it down for you in a few different perspectives. If you know where to go, it really doesn't take long to beat King Kong 2 at all. Maybe an hour or less. And the game is also really popular to speed run, as you can get through that final door that I mentioned earlier just by having enemies push you through in World 9 rather than collecting all 8 keys. And speedrunners can beat this game anywhere from like 4 to 6 minutes. My first successful playthrough was just a little bit over an hour, but that was only after I resorted to looking up a map. And that is not something I am ever striving or trying to do in any of these reviews. And it kind of hints at the fact that despite all of the interesting things that King Kong 2 is doing on paper, I found the game to have some pretty serious issues that really hampered my enjoyment. But I'll touch on that more in depth later. What I would say is that from start to finish, you're looking at about 3 to 5 hours. The first 3 to 4 hours would be getting used to the controls, getting lost, exploring and not really understanding where you're going, and the latter 1 to 2 hours being a calm and collected playthrough using a map for guidance. King Kong himself begins with the ability to toss rocks or punch. He can also jump up in the air. And as I said earlier, the most fun thing is just jumping up, swirling around, just exploring the control that you have in this game. You have a lot of control. It feels good to play. And that's why it's so sad that it kind of falls short a little bit. But anyway, the items. There are 11 different items present in King Kong 2, but 2 are directly linked to one another, so it's really more like 10. The first item is the heart. This restores health. King Kong starts with 100 hit points by default, and in each of the worlds you can pick up an additional artificial heart, and that increases your hit points by 100. And yeah, that brings me to the next item, which is the artificial hearts. Picking up an artificial heart also restores your complete health bar. So sometimes if you're going into a new world and you are extremely low on health, picking up one of these is kind of a godsend. You can pick up rocks as well, which refill Kong's rock supply. Rocks are on an ammunition counter, punching is unlimited, and each rock that you pick up is going to give you 5 more rocks. If you really wanted, you could probably play using rocks most of the time, but the game is called Megaton Punch, so I liked punching. There's also the rock case. This gives you the ability to hold more rocks. I believe you start with 20 holdable rocks by default, and each rock case is going to allow 10 additional rocks that can be held by Kong. The potion looking items are speed. It's just called speed, and these increase the speed of King Kong, both movement and in the air when you're jumping. And I have to say, I've mentioned that the control of this game is one of the best features of it. It feels good physically to play, and the speed amplifies that. You start out pretty slow, not the slowest, but pretty slow, and by the time that you have the maximum allotted 3, you're really moving. She's really moving.
She's right there. She's zooming, dude.
If you die though, you lose your speed pickups and you have to pick them up again. Similar to another Konami title, Goemon. And actually, King Kong 2 and Goemon have a lot in common. The hyper bombs are like a POW block in Mario. You touch a hyper bomb, you get a cool effect, and it obliterates everything on screen. The only downside is if there were a lot of enemies and they were spaced out, you might not get to pick up everything that they drop because pickups do disappear after a set amount of time. The star rock is the star from Mario. Not the most creative, but they do give you the star in a few fun areas, specifically one area where there are a whole bunch of tanks in World 1, and you just get to run right through all of them. So I do like that. The power rock is another pickup that's rock related that increases the damage output of your rocks, and this is really important when it comes to taking out bosses quickly. The bosses can sometimes be a little tricky, and you usually, in my case, I would save up my rocks and just make sure I had maximum rocks before entering the boss room. The Moai head is also found in this game, just like it was in Castlevania. I believe it's originally from Gradius, but I haven't played that title. But the Moai head is an extra life in this game. That's the only way you can get more lives other than getting 100,000 points. And then lastly, the 2-part item is the Konami logo, which can be found, and if picked up, you get a special treat, a flying Konami man. If you pick up the Konami man, it will restore all of your health, so more than just a regular heart pickup. But I have to say, generally, when playing this game, unless you're in one of the last few worlds that have constant long-range missiles firing at you, your health is usually not an issue, and usually it's going to be falling into a gap that kills you rather than taking damage from enemies, because they're generous with the heart drops. So, also similar to Goemon, there are a lot of different enemies in this game, and they do move kind of differently, but they're not quite as varied as they are in games like Castlevania. You've got helicopters, jeeps, tanks, long-range missiles. These are really annoying, but you're only going to find the long-range missiles firing at you when you're in the heavily, densely populated city areas, and it's actually kind of cool and adds to the atmosphere a little bit of being King Kong in a city, and they're just unloading these missiles on you. There are octopi, there are forts, there are flaps, which reminds me of the spinning squares from Zuvius. Played that on the 3DS. There is an enemy called a dead end that that kind of looks like a little white devil. They were one of my favorites. There are fire dragons, something called an iron watch. There are orcas, or killer whales, and these have one of the funniest animations in the game. They just kind of blub onto land and then go back in the ocean. There are big bug-looking things called Kamado hoppers. There are slimes, because this game was made in Japan. There's an enemy called Roji, and then there are lastly fire gates, which is just spinning fire akin to spinning fire in Mario, only in this case they're thicker and they take place over a horizontal plane rather than a vertical plane. So at this point, I want to go a little more in depth into the stages and the bosses that this game has to offer. And also in going through that, it forces the issue of the problems that I had with this title. World 1 is the advanced base. World 1 is mostly a straight line, but you wouldn't really know that without mapping it out. The sins of this game are really present from the first world on. And that's because there's just no consistency in letting you know where you can and cannot go. You actually have to move Kong around the borders of these screens that don't have any walls or any indication that you can't go left, right, or down, or else you're just not going to know whether you can go there or not, because sometimes you can go to the left or the right when there's nothing on the sides, but then other times you can't. And so in addition to kind of having to remember where you can and can't go, like just the layout of the world, so much of it looks too similar to really generate any sort of lasting map in your head. This game would be a lot better if it just told you where you could and could not go with the environment. There's also an issue where the doors in this game, those secret doors that allow you to travel between worlds, it's just not very clear when you're first starting out the game that you're in another world. There's no indicator or anything of the like. You actually have to press the start button to see that you are in a different world. And so the first time playing through this game, when I was going through World 1 and I reached the first secret door that led to World 3, I went through it and I just kind of assumed it was a dungeon. And so I worked my way almost all the way through that and then ended up later in World 2 and then also World 5. So I had no idea really where I was going and I wasn't super sure how to get back. Eventually I did become familiar with the design language in that if you go through a door and there's another door, that means it's taking you to another world. But if you go through a door and there's an item, that means you can just pick up the item and then go back. And if you do go through a door and see another door, you can go back out to exit and you don't actually have to go through with it. You don't have to go to that next world. But the screen changing issue is a little annoying here because like early on, if you go up a screen and then you go back down a screen and there happens to be on the edge of the screen a big gap, you will fall and you'll die just for kind of going a little bit too close. I think it would have been a little better if Kong had to like fully exit the screen to go down. Instead, it's just like if you're right on that border, you're never quite sure if it's going to take you down or not. So you have to be really careful around certain edges because you don't know if you're going to die. So the first boss in this game is a giant shellfish, and it's a fun boss fight. I like the boss fight, but when you beat it, you have to turn around and you have to go back, and then you have to go to the halfway point of the world really to then go to World 2 if that's where you want to go. It would have been cool if after any given boss there was an optional door that let you go to the next numerical world instead of having to go all the way to something else. You know, just something like that. And I talked a long time about this because a lot of the issues just become present in World 1 and they are pretty consistent throughout, but I won't go in as much detail for the other worlds. World 2 is the jungle frontier zone. The same sins are present here, but there's a much nicer aesthetic and color palette in World 2 with water and ruins and trees, and when you're within the trees, your head pokes out and it just kind of makes you feel a little bit more like a big monkey. The giant spider is the boss of this world, and even though it was a little hard to navigate, I'd say at first, I liked it. And then with the map, it was super easy to get around. So World 3 is the Nightmare Labyrinth. This might be the most solidly designed world in the whole game for the simple fact that there are walls, baby. It's like they designed this world. They made sure that you knew where you could and couldn't go for the most part. It really has a dungeon vibe, but it also has this big kind of tech pyramid at the end that I liked scaling right before the boss fight. And then it also has a really cool design where you have to kind of navigate through some tough platforming challenges if you want to get the artificial heart, which is kind of back around and at the bottom. It's also cool because you can see places you want to go, and you'll see, okay, I can't get there from this tile, so I'll have to go up, 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 and around to get there, and then curve back that way. And for the boss of World 3, you've got 3 giant scorpions, just like in the movie. It's a really well-designed stage, and King Kong 2 really shines in World 3. World 4 is the coastal city. I actually went through World 5 before I went through World 4 because the game kind of makes that a little bit easier. But World 4 is a good world overall, and at this point I was just using the map, so my criticisms of the layouts aren't going to be perfect for these. But anyway, the coastal city is a pretty good world, but there are these parts where it has these sort of pyramid type structures that are a little smaller than the pyramid in World 3, and it makes it kind of confusing what you can and can't walk through, so that's not great, but the orcas honestly make up for it. The boss of the coastal city is also coastal themed in that it's a giant scallop. World 5 is the peaceful town. This level is somewhat of a city that I think is only referred to as a peaceful town because it doesn't have the long range missiles. I like this level too because it has my favorite enemy, the dead ends. It's a smaller world, it's straightforward, and it kind of guides you pretty well. It's hard to get lost. There's just 2 main branches, and I was actually able to make it through this one before I started using the map. The boss of this world is just a mass of cells, and this was actually one of the only bosses that was different in the game. I don't have the footage of me beating it, and I actually had to go back using a documented cheat code for this game where it's not the regular Konami code, but if you enter it at the beginning and you have a second controller plugged in, you can press A to hop forward 1 world numerically. And so I used that to get my base Kong to World 5 just to show everyone what it looks like. World 6 is the night town, and it's one of the most visually interesting to look at a surface level, but it's a huge pain in the ass to navigate. It's just this giant grid, and you never know when it's going to cut you off because there are certain sections that poke out. I explored this before bringing in the map too, and it frustrated me, and this world is actually kind of what prompted me to just finally be like, you know what, I'm just going to use a map. It's just terrible to navigate. There's no consistency. The long range missiles are constant and annoying, but it's still kind of fine because it adds to the atmosphere, and there's so much to destroy. Don't get me wrong, it's fun to destroy stuff, specifically by jumping on top of it in King Kong, but it's time consuming, and the novelty of it wears off fast when you figure out that you have to destroy a whole bunch of stuff just to find the hidden doors that you're supposed to go through. World 7 is the mountain range, and this is pretty much a top-down view of my least favorite stage from Goemon, and it has the same flaws as that stage in that it has these ridiculous jumps that you have to make, and if King Kong gets if he's touching the edge, not past it, if you touch it on the bottom, you just fall through it and you die. And this is how you're gonna lose your lives in this game. I almost lost and game overed here. It was too risky to make the jumps. That's how little faith I had in my ability, and also it might have been impossible without the speed potions. Aesthetically though, World 7 is very pleasing. It has these nice patches of green, it has these unique clouds that fire lightning at you, and it also has a cloud that you can actually ride on your way to the artificial heart. I wasn't sure whether I could ride it or not, and so I was trying to avoid it, and it caused a death, so it's a little frustrating, but I like that they incorporated these clouds. It is pretty cool to look at, kind of spices it up a little bit. And the boss of this world is probably one of the coolest. It's kind of like a jelly bean dragon. It's cute, and it's a dragon. World 8 is the modern city, and since World 9 feels more like an underground dungeon type of thing, this feels like the last real world, and it's a healthy challenge. This is also a very well-designed world, similar to World 3, but it's well-designed with the map. Knowing where the edges to the grid are and the general shape of this world, it gives you that same sort of puzzle feeling where there's certain things you can and can't pass through, and you have to kind of make your way around to get where you to get where you need to go. World 9 is the last labyrinth. This is a mostly frustrating stage, but it's not too hard. The only issue is the map isn't really all that helpful because there are hidden things that you have to punch through in order to progress. There's no hint or anything. It's not like games like Metroid and Zelda where you start to get a feel for it. It's just it's literally just randomly placed, and it's really poorly designed. But once you do finally make it through that door with your 8 keys or by cheesing it, you have to fight 18 robotic Kongs. This is actually a pretty cool final boss fight. I liked it. The reward is honestly great. You see Lady Kong, rescue her, and then you're treated to that cute ending screen and the credits. So final thoughts on King Kong 2 for the Famicom. This is another Goemon type of game to me, where I'm impressed by a lot of the different ideas and it's doing a lot of interesting things, but it has these flaws. I think this game is more flawed than Ganbare Goemon. I think Ganbare Goemon is a better game than King Kong 2. King Kong 2 has better control. I felt more in control of King Kong than I ever did of Goemon. I think though that they do use the same engine or a very similar, slightly modified engine. What do they use? MIPS? Do they use C for Famicom? I don't know. But, you know, a few things would have really helped. If the doors told you which world it was taking you, if the game told you at all times where you were and you didn't have to press the start screen to figure out which world you were in, if it allowed you to progress to the next world optionally after defeating a boss and getting that key, and if it would always clearly close off where you could not go so that you could learn the map instead of having to learn the map and then also remember where you can't go because there's no real indication that you can't go there. If King Kong 2 tidied those things up, I think it would be a lot better of a game. I was kind of jumping into this hoping that it would be somewhat of a hidden gem style game, and I have to say it's really not a hidden gem. It's like when you have like a snack that you put in your backpack and you forgot about the snack and then you unzip it and find it and it's like, oh, my snack. Cool. I'm happy about it. Like, I don't know. Try this game. Probably don't buy this game unless you're a really big King Kong fan. The thing is, it feels so good to play it that, like, yeah, try it out. Like, I think it's cool just knowing that there's a Konami game and a King Kong game where you get to play as King Kong. But as far as like secrets go, secrets and hidden areas and feeling lost, these things can be done well. Games like Metroid, games like The Legend of Zelda, they have rewarding exploration. Whereas in this game, I don't feel rewarded for exploring. I in fact feel punished because I'm super lost now. I don't know how to get back, and it can just put you in spots where like the only thing you can really do is die or reset your game, and that'll probably save you time. I wish I had better things to say, and I wanted to say better things, but you know, it's an interesting 8-bit Konami title that does a lot of cool things with the idea of having 9 interconnected worlds that you don't have to do linearly. It's like so many cool things that are unfortunately hampered by some bad design. Does really control well though. It had so much potential, and it could have been a lot better if they had just maybe a little more time to develop it and just like polish it up a little bit. But yeah, King Kong 2 for the Famicom. Thanks for watching. Peace.
87年正月、世界中が再びパニックになる。
Can I go to the left? Can I go to the right? I don't know. I have to physically move myself there to find out.